The US job market was supposed to be our last line of defense, a symbol of resilience, proof that the American engine could keep turning no matter the storm. But in 2025, that illusion is cracking, fast. On the surface, the unemployment rate remains below 4%. Politicians cheer, CEOs smile. But behind the metrics, behind the press conferences, something dangerous is forming. Mass layoffs, collapsing wages, a working class priced out of its own future, all hidden in plain sight. The American labor system isn't bending anymore. It's breaking, and it's doing so quietly, beneath the surface, one paycheck at a time. At first glance, the US job market appears stable. In fact, it looks strong. With the official unemployment rate hovering around 3.9%, politicians and news outlets waste no time in celebrating it as a sign of recovery, proof that the economy has bounced back from the shocks of the past decade. But behind that number lies a quiet deception. The very metric used to measure economic health has become disconnected from lived reality. Because the truth is, the US doesn't have a healthy labor market, it has a redefined one. The unemployment rate, as it's presented today, only counts people who are actively looking for work. It does not count those who've stopped searching out of exhaustion or despair. It does not count the millions forced into part-time roles when they need full-time income. It completely ignores gig workers, freelancers without benefits, or the rising number of Americans juggling 3 side hustles just to pay rent. And that exclusion is no accident, it's policy. In 2025, the real story isn't the percentage of people without jobs, it's the percentage of people with jobs that can't pay the bills. Today, 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck with no financial buffer for medical emergencies, rent hikes, or rising grocery prices. That's not economic recovery, that's a silent emergency. The Bureau of Labor Statistics defines employment as anyone who worked for pay during the past week. That includes someone driving Uber 3 hours a day, someone paid by task on a delivery app, or someone freelancing without job security. It paints these fragmented lives as fully employed individuals. The reality, however, is much more fragile. Over the past 3 years, the US has seen a 40% increase in part-time and contract labor. Employers are shedding full-time roles with benefits in favor of temporary or on-demand workers. The reason? Flexibility for companies. Instability for workers. A cashier at a retail chain may technically have a job, but if her hours fluctuate week to week and her rent takes up 60% of her income, that's not a career. That's a holding pattern. Behind the celebration of low unemployment lies another overlooked truth. Millions of Americans are simply vanishing from the labor force altogether. These are people who once searched for jobs but stopped. Often because of age, illness, caregiving responsibilities, or disillusionment. In government data, they disappear. But in reality, they still exist, and they're struggling. What we're witnessing is the breakdown of a labor market where employment no longer guarantees stability, let alone prosperity. In prior generations, getting a job meant you could pay rent, build savings, and perhaps even buy a home. Today, for tens of millions, employment is just another form of managed poverty. Consider the math. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the US is now $1,870. To afford that, under the common 3 times rent rule, a worker would need to earn over $65,000 per year. But the median US wage remains stuck around $56,000, and that's before taxes, healthcare premiums, or student loan payments. In other words, even full-time employment leaves millions unable to qualify for basic shelter. And yet, in official reports, those people are considered a success story, a box ticked, a job filled. The collapse of the labor market isn't loud, it's not televised, it's not reflected in stock tickers, it's reflected in nurses living in cars, in teachers driving Uber after school, and in warehouse workers forced to sleep in parking lots between shifts. This isn't a fluke in the data, it's the new design. And when survival becomes the only reward for hard work, the very foundation of the American economy begins to rot from the inside out. The unemployment rate may be low, but so is the floor beneath millions of workers. If there's one signal the economy can't hide, it's layoffs. And in 2025, that signal is flashing red across nearly every major sector. The most powerful, most profitable corporations in the United States are not hiring. They're firing, and they're doing so at scale. In just the past year, over 120,000 high-level positions have been eliminated from companies once considered too big to fail. These aren't minor cuts in struggling industries. These are mass layoffs from America's most iconic giants: Amazon, Google, Meta, Tesla, Disney, UPS, and Walmart. Together, they employ millions, or rather, they used to. At Amazon, the story begins with 14,000 jobs lost. Not warehouse workers, but logistics analysts, product managers, and engineers from Amazon Web Services, one of the most profitable divisions in the tech world. These were the same workers who helped build the infrastructure that powered the pandemic-era e-commerce boom. But with consumer demand falling and AWS revenues stalling, they were cast out in the name of efficiency realignment. The ripple effects go beyond Amazon's offices. In Seattle, where the company is headquartered, local cafes and small businesses report foot traffic down by over 30%. When a trillion-dollar tech giant contracts, entire ecosystems begin to shrink. At Google, another 12,000 workers were cut. Entire teams in YouTube, cloud computing, and hardware development were wiped out. AI researchers, the very minds behind Google's next-gen algorithms, were laid off via mass emails, and all while the company posted record profits. What was once called innovation is now being rebranded as cost control. Then comes Meta, where 20,000 employees were terminated under the so-called Year of Efficiency. Massive layoffs across Facebook, Instagram, Reality Labs, and internal operations hit engineers and creatives alike. The reason? A failed metaverse bet and collapsing ad revenues. Meta's stockholders cheered, but inside the company, survivors walked past empty desks in silence, wondering if they'd be next. Tesla followed suit with 14,000 job cuts. Engineers working on battery systems, self-driving software, and solar integration were let go, despite the company's continued expansion into new markets. Elon Musk cited global headwinds. But the truth is simpler. High interest rates have priced middle-class buyers out of EV ownership. The dream of electrification hit a wall of affordability. Walmart, America's largest private employer, quietly laid off 25,000 workers, replacing them with automation, AI-driven logistics, and self-checkout machines. In small towns where Walmart is often the last major employer, those cuts didn't just kill jobs, they collapsed local economies. Even UPS, long considered the backbone of American logistics, cut 12,000 workers after package volume fell by over 7 million shipments per day. That's not just a shipping problem, it's a spending problem. Consumers simply aren't buying like they used to. E-commerce is shrinking, and when America stops buying, businesses stop hiring. Across all these corporations, a common pattern emerges. Layoffs are no longer just about underperformance, they're strategic. Profits are no longer driven by expansion, they're driven by reduction. Cut costs, inflate earnings per share. Satisfy Wall Street. And this wave of corporate downsizing doesn't just affect white-collar workers, it hits janitors, caterers, IT support, and security staff. When Google cuts 10,000 jobs, another 10,000 contractors, service providers, and local vendors lose their livelihoods in the shadows. What's happening in 2025 is a coordinated recalibration of labor across every major US employer. It's not about recession anymore, it's about extraction. These corporations are not shrinking because they're failing. They're shrinking because the system now rewards subtraction over growth. The American worker is no longer a partner in progress. They're a line item, a cost center to be reduced. And the moment profitability requires fewer people, the people go first, no matter how loyal, experienced, or essential they may be. This is not a blip. It's not cyclical, it's systemic. And as these layoffs continue to accelerate, the job market begins to reveal its true shape. Not a ladder of opportunity, but a funnel of attrition. Once upon a time, automation was framed as a tool, a way to make life easier, to lift workers from manual labor into better jobs, and to push civilization forward. That's not what's happening anymore. In 2025, automation is no longer complementing the workforce. It's replacing it. And what makes this different from past industrial shifts is who it's targeting. For the first time in modern history, the middle class is under direct assault, not by policy, not by inflation, but by code and circuitry. From cashiers to coders, dispatchers to designers, no job is immune. The wave of automation sweeping through the economy is faster, more precise, and more ruthless than any before it. And unlike the factory robots of the 1980s, today's replacements don't weld metal. They analyze data, answer emails, write legal briefs, and even generate marketing campaigns. At Walmart, nearly 25,000 jobs have already been replaced by self-checkout machines, automated fulfillment centers, and AI scheduling software. At UPS, AI-powered sorting systems now handle millions of parcels a day without human input, cutting thousands of warehouse and routing jobs in the process. At Meta, content moderation, ad targeting, and internal communications are now increasingly managed by proprietary AI tools, making thousands of human roles redundant. And this is just the beginning. Across the country, hospitals are using machine learning software to interpret radiology scans faster and cheaper than human specialists. Law firms are integrating legal AI to write contracts and summarize depositions, eliminating the need for junior associates and paralegals. Even fast food chains are piloting fully autonomous kitchens, where burgers, fries, and drinks are assembled by robotic arms, not teenagers. The promise of efficiency is seductive, but the human cost is quietly devastating. What was once a strong, reliable foundation, the American middle class, is now being hollowed out, algorithm by algorithm. White-collar roles that were once considered safe. Accountants, HR coordinators, administrative assistants, project managers are being phased out under the polite label of optimization. But what it really means is this: the middle class no longer makes economic sense to corporations. The math is simple. A salaried employee costs $70,000 per year. An AI subscription or machine license might cost a fraction of that, with no healthcare, no paid leave, no sleep, no burnout, and no complaints. And the implications go far beyond economics. Middle-class jobs were once a pillar of societal stability. They funded home ownership, built savings, sustained local economies, and supported education. When you remove that pillar, what happens? You get a society of gig workers constantly competing against software just to stay afloat. You get engineers freelancing on 5 platforms. You get teachers driving ride shares after school. You get former accountants working as delivery drivers because their skills are now automatable. This isn't innovation, it's a restructuring of the social contract. And the psychological toll is just as severe as the financial one. What happens when your job, your identity, becomes obsolete overnight? When decades of training are replaced by a few lines of code? When your employer tells you politely that your value has been absorbed into an app? We are approaching a dangerous threshold, not where jobs disappear altogether, but where only 2 types of jobs remain: those who build the machines and those who are ruled by them. And the ladder between those 2 worlds, it's gone. In 2025, automation is no longer a wave on the horizon. It's the ground beneath us, shifting, cracking, and reshaping the future of work. The middle class is not being laid off, it's being made irrelevant. The American worker is doing everything right, showing up, clocking in, staying late, taking on second jobs. But no matter how much they grind, the finish line keeps moving, just out of reach. Why? Because in 2025, wages are frozen while prices keep rising. It's not a theory, it's arithmetic. Since 2020, real wages in the US have declined by over 3.5% after adjusting for inflation. Yet during that same period, the cost of living has exploded. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has hit $1,817 a month. Groceries are up 12 to 18% across categories like meat, produce, and dairy. Health insurance premiums are at record highs. Gas, childcare, and electricity have all surged. But here's what hasn't changed: the paycheck. The median hourly wage is still hovering near $27. That's just over $56,000 per year, pre-tax. For a family of 3 in a major city, it's barely survival. And for tens of millions of Americans, it's not even that. The economy keeps growing, but that growth is no longer shared. Since 2000, worker productivity has increased by over 60%. But median wages have only grown by 17%. The gap between effort and reward has widened into a canyon, and corporations know it. In 2025, corporate profit margins are at their highest in decades, topping 12%, double what they were in the early 1990s. CEO bonuses are hitting 8 figures. Stock buybacks have crossed $920 billion in 1 year alone. The money is there, it's just not going to workers. And that isn't a glitch, it's the model. In today's economy, the worker isn't seen as a partner in value creation, they're a cost to be minimized. The goal is no longer to build wealth together, it's to extract output without raising compensation. Even when companies post record profits, wages stay flat. Raises, if they come at all, are outpaced by the cost of eggs and rent. And it's not just low-income jobs anymore. Mid-level roles, teachers, nurses, municipal employees, engineers are finding themselves priced out of the very communities they serve. In California, a starting public school teacher earning $52,000 a year would need $7,000 in upfront cash just to move into a one-bedroom apartment in most cities. That's before groceries, before car payments, before student loans. The math doesn't work. But the system keeps pretending it does, and this is the quiet part no one says out loud. Wage stagnation is intentional. It's not the result of a weak economy. It's the result of a strong one that no longer needs people to thrive. Automation reduces labor demand. Global outsourcing caps salary expectations. And when 500 applicants compete for one job, employers know they can offer less. The desperation becomes leverage. Meanwhile, inflation, which is often blamed on wage increases, is largely driven by corporate pricing power. In sector after sector, companies are not raising prices because of rising costs. They're doing it because they can. They call it price optimization. Economists call it greedflation. Consumers call it unlivable. And all the while, the burden keeps shifting downward. Workers are told to budget better, cut lattes, start a side hustle, but there's no amount of budgeting that makes $2,000 of rent affordable on a $3,200 monthly paycheck. The math doesn't add up, and people know it. That's why savings are collapsing. That's why credit card debt just passed $1.33 trillion. That's why millions are now working more, but owning less. And that's the most dangerous illusion of all, that the job market is healthy when it's actually producing poverty at scale. Because when the price of everything rises, but your value stays the same, you're not participating in an economy. You're being harvested by one. There's a quiet shift happening in America, not with headlines or protests, but with silence. Millions of young Americans are simply vanishing from the workforce. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't want to work, but because they've done the math, and the math doesn't work anymore. Today, Gen Z and younger millennials are entering adulthood under the weight of a collapsing promise. They were told, go to school, get good grades, earn a degree, land a stable job, build a future. But in 2025, that path has disintegrated beneath their feet. The average student loan debt now sits around $39,000. Rent consumes nearly 45% of post-tax income for renters under 30. Entry-level positions have been replaced by contract roles, freelance gigs, and internships that might lead somewhere. Even college graduates are increasingly working minimum wage service jobs, trapped in what economists call underemployment, and they're tired. Because after investing years and tens of thousands of borrowed dollars in a system that promised stability, many are finding that even 2 jobs isn't enough to survive. Their reward for doing everything right is anxiety, burnout, and financial paralysis. That paralysis shows up in the numbers. 61% of renters under 40 say they will likely never own a home. Over half of Gen Z workers say they don't believe capitalism works. And for the first time in modern history, a majority of young Americans believe they will be worse off than their parents. This isn't apathy, it's economic realism. The entry ramps to adulthood, home ownership, job security, marriage, children, are no longer milestones. They're financial luxuries. Buying a home now requires a 6-figure income. Starting a family demands daycare costs equivalent to a second rent. And even securing a decent apartment often requires $5,000 to $7,000 in upfront deposits and proof of 3x rent, something few entry-level workers can produce. The result is a generation in survival mode. They delay milestones, they move back home, they skip healthcare, they work 60 hours and still can't build savings. And increasingly, they opt out. They opt out of traditional employment. They opt out of 9-to-5 jobs. They opt out of the institutions that promised them a future and delivered debt instead. And this isn't just cultural, it's structural. The job market that young Americans are entering is built on extraction, not development. Most job postings require 2 to 3 years of experience, even for so-called entry-level roles. Internships are unpaid or underpaid. Career ladders have been replaced with revolving doors, and automation is cutting off advancement faster than new opportunities can form. At the same time, social media fuels unrealistic expectations. Curated images of wealth, luxury, and success bombard a generation that's struggling just to make rent. This creates a feedback loop of despair, where effort feels meaningless and comparison feels constant. But perhaps the most telling metric is this. Labor force participation among Americans aged 20 to 24 has dropped significantly since 2019. And it's not recovering. Many are choosing side hustles, digital freelancing, or leaving the formal job market altogether, not because they want to drift, but because they see no future inside the system. This is the silent rebellion no one talks about. Not loud, not violent, but deeply consequential. Because when a society loses the belief of its youngest generation, it doesn't just lose productivity, it loses direction. And as the young workforce disappears into gig apps, burnout, and quiet resignation, America faces a sobering question. What happens when an entire generation stops believing that hard work leads anywhere at all? There was a time when corporations hired to grow. They built factories, they trained employees, they reinvested in their communities. A company's success meant more jobs, more opportunity, and more prosperity. But that era is over. In 2025, corporate America isn't hiring, it's harvesting. The goal is no longer expansion, it's extraction. Across every major sector, companies are sitting on record profits. Wall Street celebrates the numbers. Over $2.8 trillion in corporate profits, more than $920 billion in stock buybacks in a single year, and a 12% average profit margin, the highest in modern US history. But instead of funneling that growth into hiring, wages, or infrastructure, corporations are hoarding it, redistributing that capital upward through dividends, buybacks, and executive compensation. The result? Companies are growing richer while the workforce is shrinking. At Amazon, engineers are being cut while drone systems and warehouse robots take over. At Walmart, humans are being replaced by AI-driven fulfillment centers. At Google, entire product teams are being dissolved, not because they failed, but because their salaries outweighed their shareholder value. This isn't business evolution, it's strategic subtraction. And here's the critical shift. A job is no longer the point. It's a cost, a liability, a drag on quarterly reports. Executives are now rewarded for doing less with fewer people. If a company can increase output by automating 30,000 roles out of existence, Wall Street reacts with applause, not concern. Hiring is now framed as a risk. Firing is seen as discipline. And the fewer people needed to operate, the more valuable the company becomes on paper. This model isn't just tolerated, it's institutionalized. Tax codes incentivize stock buybacks, mergers eliminate redundancies, software licenses replace salaries, AI tools write content, answer support tickets, handle logistics, and even monitor employees. And when hiring does happen, it often looks like this. Contract only, no benefits, algorithmically scheduled, and terminable at any time without severance. In this system, labor isn't just undervalued, it's dehumanized. A resume isn't a story anymore, it's a keyword checklist. Interviews are automated, performance reviews are digital scorecards, and job security? It doesn't exist. Even employees once considered safe, software engineers, data scientists, designers, now live under the constant shadow of the next optimization cycle. A single internal memo can erase departments that took decades to build. The most dangerous part? It's all framed as efficiency. But efficiency for who? Because for the average American worker, life is getting harder. Wages are flat, hours are rising, healthcare costs are climbing, and benefits are disappearing. Meanwhile, the value created by their labor doesn't return to them. It flows up into shareholder portfolios, into executive bonuses, into quarterly gains. This isn't the free market at work. It's a closed loop where workers produce value but are denied access to it. And in that loop, something else is dying. Not just opportunity, but trust. Trust in the idea that effort leads to advancement. Trust in the belief that hard work will be recognized. Trust in the social contract itself. Because when corporations treat labor like a line item, when profit is measured by how many people you didn't hire, and when every cost cut becomes a stock bump, you don't have an economy built on growth. You have one built on harvesting human productivity until there's nothing left to extract. On paper, everything looks fine. The headlines say the economy is strong, unemployment is under 4%, job postings are up, the stock market is rallying. But beneath the surface, something doesn't add up. Because for tens of millions of Americans, the job market doesn't feel functional. It feels fake, disconnected, unstable, deceptive. This is the illusion of a functioning labor economy. One where jobs technically exist, but no longer provide stability, growth, or even dignity. Here's what that illusion looks like in practice. You apply for a position online. It's marked as full-time. But after 2 interviews, you're offered a contractor role. No benefits, no job security, no path forward. You're told to bring your own laptop, work your own hours, and pay your own taxes. This isn't an exception anymore. It's becoming the default. In 2025, nearly 36% of the US workforce now operates within the gig economy. They deliver food, manage remote admin tasks, design websites, drive rideshare, and handle customer service tickets. Without benefits, sick leave, pensions, or health coverage. They're not unemployed, but they're not protected either, and yet they count in the data, just like someone with a full-time salary, a healthcare plan, and a retirement account. This is where the illusion begins, because the number of people working tells us nothing about the quality, security, or sustainability of that work. Politicians praise job creation, but don't mention that most of those jobs are part-time, underpaid, or temporary. They celebrate strong labor markets, but ignore the 60-hour work weeks and second jobs people take just to make ends meet. The reality is that millions of Americans are working harder than ever and yet falling further behind. You see it in the data. Real wages have declined. Median household savings have collapsed. Credit card debt is now over $1.33 trillion, the highest in US history. Rent consumes over 40% of income for many workers, and even among full-time employees, 78% live paycheck to paycheck. So yes, people are employed, but the value of that employment has collapsed. And for many, the job itself has become a treadmill, moving fast, going nowhere. Ask the nurse working double shifts who sleeps in her car. Ask the teacher who moonlights as a delivery driver. Ask the engineer freelancing across 5 platforms just to pay for rent and medication. These people are not lazy. They are not failing. They are functioning inside a broken model that tells them the system is working, while it slowly wears them down. What's worse is how this illusion is maintained. Official statistics exclude millions who've given up looking for work entirely. Poverty thresholds are based on outdated formulas from the 1960s. Side gigs are counted as employment even when they don't cover the cost of living. And when the numbers don't match reality, the narrative is spun instead of questioned. People are told they're not budgeting well enough, that they should learn to code, that their hardship is a personal failing, not a systemic one. But a strong job market doesn't force people to skip meals. A functioning economy doesn't produce burnout as the baseline, and an honest system doesn't need illusions to stay standing. The truth is, America's labor engine is running on fumes. Jobs exist, but they don't offer upward mobility. Employment is rising, but financial security is collapsing. Companies are thriving, while their workers are quietly drowning. So when we talk about low unemployment, we need to ask, low unemployment for who? Because a job that doesn't let you live isn't a job, it's a leash. The US job market isn't collapsing because Americans stopped working. It's collapsing because the system stopped rewarding work. A nation where labor produces billions but workers live paycheck to paycheck is not a free market. It's a rigged machine, and the first step toward fixing it is seeing it for what it truly is. Not a temporary downturn, but a fundamental design flaw. The question now is simple. How long will Americans keep working for an economy that's no longer working for them?